Champions Mojo is part of the CG Sports Network.
Welcome to the award-winning Champions Mojo, hosted by two world record-holding athletes and health, life, and leadership coaches. Be inspired as you listen to Conversations with Champions. And now, your hosts, Kelly Pallas and Maria Parker.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Champions Mojo podcast. And once again, I am co-hosting with Maria Parker. Hello, Maria.
Hi, Kelly. It's good to be with you.
Yes. Welcome back from your big adventure of crossing the canyon and raising money for brain cancer. How was it?
Oh, it was, I can't even begin to tell you how cool it was. Wonderful. We raised a lot of money, and the Grand Canyon is one of the most beautiful places on earth. And I can't wait to get back.
Awesome. Well, we are really excited today. We are going to get to talk with Karen Allen, who is a keynote speaker and founder of 100% Human. Karen survived a family tragedy of just unspeakable proportions and now believes we can all benefit from sharing our pain with others. Maria, there's a lot more to Karen, but we do want to get straight to talking with her. What else can you tell us?
Well, Karen's got a popular TED Talk, a podcast, a blog, and now she's got a book coming out soon. She's passionate about mental wellness, growth mindset, and authenticity, and she wants to inspire us all. So let's hear from Karen about how we can do that. Karen, welcome to Champions Mojo.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, ladies. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, welcome. So Karen, of course, in our research, we did listen to your TED Talk. And if our listeners have not done so, you suffered this just just an unbelievable tragedy in your family. Can you kind of tell us what that was and how your story started?
Yeah. It's funny because you go through life and you think that if I do all these things, if I, go to school or marry the right person or have 2.5 kids and a bird and a dog, then life will turn out great. It'll be smooth sailing. And I think somebody spiked our juice boxes when we were younger, because I found out that, you could try to be, all of those things and you still have no idea what life will bring you in a matter of minutes. I think we've all learned in some way, shape, or form, especially through this last year of the pandemic, that life can change in an instant. And that's what happened for me and with my family. So I was a recruiter at the time, and I was going to do some interviews from home one evening. My husband at the time was a CrossFit owner, and so he was doing his evening classes. And while I was home and on the first interview call, I noticed that my cell phone was buzzing, and I was using the house phone. So it was outside of arm reach, but once I turned it over, I saw that I had several missed calls from one of our gym members. And in a matter of moments, I'm thinking about all of the worst case scenarios, thinking maybe Richard broke his arm or maybe hit his head, or, those were the worst case scenarios that I was envisioning. But nothing prepared me for what I heard when I answered the phone, which initially was just a lot of screaming, a lot of chaos. I really couldn't make out what she was saying. And then finally, the one word I was able to understand was shot. And I don't even remember, people have asked me this before, but I don't even remember who or when they told me that he didn't survive, because when I was on my way to the gym, somebody actually walked into the gym and shot him. So when I was on my way there, one of the thoughts that crossed my mind at rapid speed was, why am I not on my way to the hospital? Because if, 15, 20 minutes, too much time, if whatever time had passed, by the time I got the call, I should have been on my way to the hospital. And so when I pulled up to the gym, it was, full of first responders and news vans and people who I didn't know, people who I did know. It was crazy. And yeah, they told me that somebody walked in and shot him while he was teaching the CrossFit class. Thankfully, my son and I were not there because, again, I happened to be home that day having to do interviews for a VP position that I was recruiting for. So that was the moment that everything changed, but it actually created a ripple effect that took me through the ringer. I mean, for a year, it was just a roller coaster. I ended up losing my house, my car, my job, and I felt like I was starting from ground zero. And that was when I realized, like, I have to take responsibility for my healing, because there are so many things that are outside of our control, what is within my control? And I felt like nothing. I mean, I felt hopeless. I felt like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but my son was my North Star. And so me taking responsibility for my healing, my mindset, my choices, just breath by breath. It wasn't this big, grandiose plan. It was like just moment by moment, try to do your best. It was because I refused to let that be his story where he would lose both parents. And I knew if I didn't start to take care of myself, if I didn't make a conscious effort to heal from this, then that would be the end result for him. And he didn't deserve that. So I fought like hell.
Was it a mentally ill person or somebody that, knew him, or where did this person come in? And then of course, I'd love to talk with you about forgiveness as well, because that's that
actually wraps all up into one answer, because it's still an unsolved case. So it went cold.
No.
So at the time that we are recording this, it has been 8 years.
Oh,
And what was interesting was, have you all ever read the book, The Shack?
yes.
Great book.
Beautiful book.
That's great. But I remember I had been told to read it years before any of this happened, but maybe about a year or 2 years after the movie came out. So I decided I was going to go at 10 a.m. by myself, because I knew I was going to be ugly crying. I didn't want anybody with me. And it was a moment in that movie that I really felt God spoke to me and helped me to understand that when it comes to forgiveness, I can't wait to have closure to then start my healing.
Right.
Because what if closure never comes?
Right.
And honestly, a lot of people, they do wait for that. Whether it is, in my situation, I thought if I knew who did this, if I had some sort of, answer, then I would be able to move on. And I recognize, like, I may never get that. So does that mean that I will never move on? And so the forgiveness that was wrapped up in that was this deep compassion for, I don't know what that other person was going through. And I don't know what brought them to that point where they thought that was the only option, that they thought that was what they should have done, that was the thing that they needed to do. Because I was thinking, man, so many other times they could have made a different decision. They didn't have to get in the car. They didn't have to turn down the street. They didn't have to pull the trigger, even if they were standing there with the gun facing my husband. And they didn't. And I feel so sorry for the fact that they thought that was the right thing to do. And while I'll never understand their story, should I let them have ownership over my story? No.
Right.
I'm not going to give you that power. And so it wasn't forgiveness. Like, I think for me, forgiveness was more of acceptance. And people think that acceptance means everything's okay.
Right.
I think acceptance is acknowledging your starting point and just saying, okay, I acknowledge where I am. I accept where I am. And now I can choose more clearly what direction I want to go. And so my forgiveness, being wrapped up in acceptance, all came from having to accept that I may never have closure.
So when this has been 8 years, you said?
Correct. Yes.
So you spiraled down financially, emotionally, and then you started to rebuild and heal. And tell me when you realized, look, I think I have something I can share with others. And where did that come in your journey?
I feel sometimes, I thought about this one time. So I read a Bible study and I was like, oh my gosh, that is so me. I kind of felt like Gideon, how like God was like, oh, I have to give you another sign. He's like, well, are you sure? And he's like, oh, I have to give you another sign.
Right.
Like, that's so me. That was
I
so
just read
me.
that. Yeah.
But the first time that I knew that I was going to have to do something with this, but I did not receive it, was only a few months after Richard died. And I had this like lucid dream that I was speaking in front of people. I never wanted to be a speaker, never thought that I would be a speaker. Being an entrepreneur wasn't even like in my vocabulary. So when I had that moment, I felt God say, you're going to take your pain, you're going to turn it into purpose, and you're going to pay it forward to help others. To which I replied, I don't know who you're talking to, because that's not me. Like, that's not going to happen here. And so nothing manifested from that, because I wasn't pursuing it. I wasn't putting my faith in action, next to each other. And so it wasn't until the year later when I lost my job and I was sitting in the car crying, and I felt like a complete loser, because now I'm a single parent, can't provide for my kid. Like, what else could go wrong? And I remember the moment where I thought to myself, you know what? This could either be another worse thing that happened to me, or this could have been the push, because I never would have taken that leap on my own. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to just build a life where my son will always be first, because I'm the only parent he's got. So I need the freedom and flexibility to put him first. And so it was during those next 8 weeks that I just started asking God, like, what does this look like? What are you asking me to do? Where should I go? And initially it wasn't speaking. It wasn't talking about grief or mental wellness or any of that. It was like, I need to keep the lights on, so let me keep recruiting on my own. But I felt this tug. I just knew, like, I have to share this. And so I started to explore it. But I would say it took about 4 years before I really recognized that I should create a business, a career around this. And it was when my mom asked me, what do you think actually started your healing? And I said, I think I shifted my mindset. And when we got off the call, I lay down on the ground. I went into meditation and I started asking, what did I do? How did I do this? How was I able to pick myself back up? And that's when the mental exercise stop and shift came to me. And so I didn't teach anybody at first. I waited a little more. And then I started to teach it to folks, and everybody started using it, whether I was teaching a one-on-one client or teaching audiences. And then I started to see the science that showed that it wasn't faith that, or excuse me, it wasn't luck that helped me. It wasn't magic. It was the fact that something intuitively downloaded into me. I started practicing it. And because of that repetition and that action and that effort, I actually changed my brain. I helped to change the neuroplasticity, which helped me to not wallow in self-pity, but pick myself up and create some healthy actions around that.
So
Tell us about stop and shift.
shift. That was exactly my question.
So this is how it played out. I kept visualizing the monster without a face, but visualizing a monster walking in and taking Richard's life. And I was replaying all of the things. Was he afraid? Did he see? Did he feel all this? And I could feel the overwhelm, the distress, right? Because cortisol automatically makes us feel depleted and heavy. And so I felt that. And then I recognized that, wait, but when I noticed that in myself and it didn't feel good and I knew that it was unhealthy, how did I pull away from it?
Yeah.
Well, instead of my eyes being fixed on the monster in my mind, this is a visualization, my eyes turned to my son. And I was thinking, okay, how can I be there for him? And I started thinking about positive changes, healthy actions, habits that would help me to be my goal, a healthy, happy, and whole mom. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't even believe that it was possible, but that was the goal. And then the process in between was every shift. So that was the first time that I could actually like articulate, oh, it was stop and shift. I was stopping a negative thought cycle and shifting to a positive and productive direction. But what I found is in the stop, oh my gosh, there's so much underneath of that. But basically what it does is it starts to pull back into effect your prefrontal cortex, which is the CEO of your brain, which helps you to think clearly, make good decisions, problem solve, be creative, all that good stuff. So when you notice a negative thought cycle and you decide, I'm going to stop this, you're becoming aware of it. And we know that any transformation starts with awareness.
Right.
And then you are also activating the part of your brain that can help you make good decisions, that can help you find an alternate path. And that's the shift. So I say that stop is the voice and shift is the choice. That's where you get to decide who you want to be and align your thoughts, your actions, and your words with being that person.
So then 100% Human, which is the name of your business, and very cool. Tell us about 100% Human.
Well, I knew when I started this, it wasn't going to just be about me. As a matter of fact, I'm very awkward about talking about my story. I know that is impactful, but everybody has a story. And as I was on my own healing journey, I was seeing some of the similarities between myself and others who are experiencing completely different hardships. And so I wrestled with that. And if anybody is an entrepreneur and they're wrestling with what do I call my name, it's okay if it takes you 6 years. Let me just tell you, that's coming from someone that has happened to. And so I went through all these different ebbs and flows, but it happened when I was talking to a business coach and I said, I really just want people to know that life is messy and it's hard for everyone and nobody is perfect. But if we can just accept that we are all connected through this human experience, if we could just be 100% human, then that's going to help us to raise one another up, to be vulnerable with each other, to stop acting like we have to have it all together, but instead like to unite through our pain so that we can continue to progress. And so she was like, hold on, sorry, did you hear what you just said? Did you? So that's where it came from. It was this moment that I recognized that, it's not about being 100% positive or having it, or being 100% on all the time.
Right.
It is just about being your authentic self, being in alignment with who you were uniquely created to be, because everybody, just like our fingerprints are different, our soul work is different. And so we are so focused on trying to create this perfect life when we should be focusing on building some skills to get through the hard stuff and then really fulfilling what our soul is asking us to do. Because when we do that, it serves the world. And so that's how it started to come into, I want to create a movement. I want to create a community of people who are all about being human, regardless of our differences, but connecting through that one thing. And that's us being human together.
Oh, that's so beautiful, especially in this time right now when there's so much division over stupid little stuff. But, I think somebody could look at you and say, well, you're so beautiful and you seem to have it so together. And I know you still struggle because we all do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you give an example of how, just maybe this week or last week or, where you had to stop and shift or whatever?
Tons of examples. So I'll give you one that I actually share often, because it's what happens when you start to train your brain is you can make better decisions faster the more that you practice, right? So there's this moment where Caleb, he was younger, and I'll give you a recent one too, but he was younger and he was supposed to be brushing his teeth as we were getting ready to go out to school. And he wasn't. He actually had his toothbrush and he was sword fighting with the water, right? So of course, being a kid. And so there were a couple of times I walked by, hey, Caleb, come on. Hey, Caleb, come on. So maybe the third or fourth time I walk by, and I see he's still playing, and Caleb, I need you to come. You're making us late. And I'm just like going off, but I'm going off in my head because I caught myself before it flew out of my mouth. And as I was going off in my mind, I thought to myself, do you really want to start his day like that? Like, is that the voice that you want him to hear? He's literally just being a kid. He's just playing. You still have plenty of time. It wasn't your timing, but you're good. And so it was one of those moments where, I felt the emotion. I knew that I was about to go off on this kid. And I was able to catch myself because of practice, just practice. But this happens all the time. It happens when I doubt myself about the things that I'm doing with work. It happens when I'm frustrated that I'm not as far as I want to be. It happens in parenting. I've lost my cool with him. That's a great example of me catching myself, but I've lost myself as well. And I will go back to him and apologize because I want to show that, like, you can still mess up and come back and apologize. And there was another time where I said to him, because he was doing something that was crazy, but I was already in an impatient state. And I noticed that. But I said to him, Caleb, in this moment, I really feel like flipping this table. Like everything inside of me, I am ready to throw this table across the room. But I'm not. So I want you to recognize that it's okay that you feel these emotions. That is not what I'm teaching when I teach stop and shift, for you to like stop the emotions or the complexities of these thoughts. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying to acknowledge them. So in that moment, I did the same thing. I showed that human side of me, right? That I want to react this way. And then I told him, I said, but I'm making a choice to not. My next choice is you need to go to your room because I need to take some breaths. But it is something that we all go through. And the moments, they happen so fast, but the more you practice, the easier it gets to shift.
So besides that, talk with us about mental wellness.
Yes. A lot of talk about mental health recently, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've been talking about it with COVID, a lot of stress, changes, uncertainty. It reminds us that things are out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And even a lot of, people like Simone Biles sharing her story of mental health. So a lot of conversation around mental health. But I recognize something that a lot of people thought and still think that mental health only has to do with illnesses and disorders, right? Like anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorders. And so as I was doing my own healing, I thought to myself, I think that's a limiting conversation, because if you don't think you have an illness or disorder, you think that mental health has nothing to do with you. But that would be like saying, if you don't have diabetes or high blood pressure, then physical health has nothing to do with you. And that's absolutely ridiculous. So how can we expand this conversation? What really falls under this mental space? And I've, for the last few years, been using the term mental strength training. That's how we develop our resilience. That's how because it's a muscle, it's a skill that you can build. If you think about yourself doing one push-up, and it's hard today, but if you did one push-up every day this year, wouldn't you get stronger? It's the same thing with your mental strength. So I sat again, I like to lay on the ground or in my beds where I do my best thinking, but so I was laying in my bed at this point and I thought, okay, well, mental health, what does that have to do with? It has to do with our brain health, which is like, you need to have enough sleep, you need to drink water, you need to get exercise. All of that actually helps your brain health. But it also does encompass illnesses and disorders, which is people who are, born with any sort of chemical imbalance. That's your brain chemistry. But even if you weren't born with that, like myself, I experienced trauma that did impact my brain chemistry. And most people don't recognize that. Most people don't even recognize the micro stressors that create trauma, because we think we're supposed to grin and bear it. We're supposed to just keep going, right? Just keep swimming. Like, no, that actually impacts your brain. So that's mental health. But mental strength is about building that resilience muscle, right? When things get hard, do you keep going? Are you able to then harness the power of positive psychology, which means you build on the good and the good gets better, right? Can you ground yourself in gratitude when things feel overwhelming? So that's mental strength. And then we have mental performance. So these three pillars make up mental wellness, but mental performance, you guys know, athletes are already talking about this. They have mental performance coaches. And what's the whole point of mental performance? For you to be able to show up, focus, and bring your best to the table, even when the pressure is on. Even when your stress is at an all-time high, you learn skills and habits that help you to lock in. I don't know about you, but I want to be the best mom I can be. I want to be the best speaker I can be. Even if so many other things are disrupting my flow, how can I lock in so I can bring my best to the table when it really matters? So I think if we raise the conversation from mental health to mental wellness, everybody finds their place. Everybody is willing to step in, because yes, who doesn't want to build their resilience? Who doesn't want to perform at their best? And who doesn't want to think with a clear, optimal brain? All of those things together fall under this umbrella. And that's where I hope we can take the conversation.
So this is a great analogy, because if you're totally out of shape and you're out of shape, it takes a long time to go from, the couch and diabetes or whatever to being fit. And I think some people get discouraged at the length of that journey. Is it similar in mental wellness, would you say?
Absolutely. And it's even harder to measure your growth, because when you're working out, you can check the scale to see if you're losing weight. You'll start to notice some changes in your body. So the way I teach my clients is you measure your growth differently. And this is how you do it. So you notice that you're stressed. How long do you stay in that space of negativity, of despair, of misery? Is it 2 weeks? Is it a month? Okay, now you know how long it takes you to shake that feeling. Next time, the same stressor, you have to compare it to the same stressor. So that's important. Next time the same stressor triggers you, how long do you stay in that space? Now, most people would think, oh man, but like so many hard things are happening. I mean, every day I spill my coffee, I'm late to something, my kid's on my nerve, whatever it is, right? Guess what? That is all an opportunity to exercise, to flex that muscle, to practice the shift. And there are little ways that you can do this. You can meditation, that helps you. Mindfulness is incredibly powerful. And some people think mindfulness is just meditation. But if you build in little habits like meditating, taking screen breaks, drinking water, going to bed on time, those are 4 little things that you can do in your day, but they're little habits that compound over time. They impact your brain. They impact your outlook on life, and they impact your energy level and when you need to show up. Now, the other way to measure your growth, and I forget, so I'm borrowing this from someone and I don't remember who. I'm a student of life, so I'm always reading and listening from places. But what we often do when we set out to achieve a certain goal is we compare ourselves to our future self. We compare ourselves to, oh, I want to be that person, but gosh, it's taking me a long time. Why am I not there sooner? How come, right? Instead, compare yourself to your past self. Because the more you do that, it helps you to see the progress you're making, and it gives you a little more momentum to keep going. And so in that moment, when I was about to lose it with Caleb and he was brushing his teeth or sword fighting or whatever he was supposed to be doing, I could see that it took me a few seconds to bring myself back to center, to check in and say, how do I want to respond to this? And to make sure that I was doing so in the context of the type of mom that I want to be. And so that is when I saw, wow, Karen, you really are able to control yourself when you're getting ready to lose it, or right? So it's all these moments that instead of comparing ourselves to who we want to be, if we pause, check in, and compare to how we used to act, you will be able to see that growth.
Oh, that's good. So the two things are, how long does it take to, and the other thing is comparing to your past self rather than your
Correct.
future self. Is there any other measures? Because I really like this. It's, as you said, it's hard to measure.
It is, but those are the best measurements.
Okay.
And just keep in mind, this is so important. Every time that you feel like, oh, I lost it, or I didn't do it as fast, it's okay. Did you shift? Like, it's just like saying, you know, for people who loathe exercising, I finally got back into it, but sometimes I had to tell myself like 5 minutes is better than 0 minutes, right? So even in that moment, in that hardship, you shifting, the fact that you still, doesn't matter how much time at that point, did you shift? That's a win. It's never win or lose. It's win or learn.
So I'm sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
So,
Go ahead.
so if we go back to your real traumatic moment where we all have those, and again, in your TED talk, if people haven't heard it, they need to listen to it, where we get the cancer diagnosis, or we have a loved one pass away, or, you know, that critical moment of, oh my gosh, and you feel your stomach just drop through the floor, and you can't feel your limbs, you can't think, you don't even know what you're doing. And it takes, you fall so far down in a pit that you can't even see the blue sky above you. What would be 2 or 3 things that you did that really helped you pull out, just, you know, rope climb up out of the hole? What would be 2 or 3 things that helped you?
Yes, that's a great question. So for anybody who finds themselves in that fresh space, I'll say, of despair, please do not think that I am telling you to find a positive. Because one of the things that I absolutely hate, and I wrote this in my book, is when somebody, if you go through something devastating and somebody close to you says, you know, everything happens for a reason. I would love to just smack people in the forehead, right?
Yeah,
Like, please do not come at me with that, because that's just, it's not helpful. It's not helpful. But what you can do personally is, the first thing I did was gratitude. It really was, because the nighttime was the hardest time for me to unwind and to settle my thoughts, because that was a time where Richard and I had our routine, right? We would talk about the day. He would tell me about his clients. We would run through different workouts he was going to do. You know, we would watch Martin eat ice cream. Like, we would just, like, it was our fun time to unwind without the rest of the world needing us. When he was gone, it became the hardest time for me. And so I would have to fall asleep, or try to put myself to sleep, by saying things like, God, thank you for this pillow. Thank you that it's soft. Thank you for this house, even though I know that I need to move and this is really hard. And I don't know how I'm going to make payment next month, but I'm just glad that I have a safe place right now. I went so basic with my gratitude, and it was just enough to keep that hope afloat. Now, what happens is you have to pick your focal point, because our thoughts are just a focal point. So if you notice that you're repeating that hardship and that story over and over in your mind, as soon as you're aware that you're repeating that thought cycle, it is your choice to decide if you want to continue down that spiral, or if you want to look for gratitude, or if you want to do something that maybe relieves some stress, for example, exercising or talking to a friend. That's a choice, and that's a choice that you have to make on your own. And I'm not saying that, especially when people hear, well, find something to be grateful for. You know, that's not toxic positivity. I'm not saying like you have to be positive, but I'm saying, even though being positive doesn't make all things better, being negative always makes it worse. And so there's this Buddhist parable that talks about the second arrow. The first one is pain. The second one is suffering, but you're pulling that second one. The first one happens. We feel grief. We feel anger. We feel sadness. That is naturally going to happen. But then once you notice it, if you decide to focus on that toxic emotion, you are now increasing your suffering. So the first thing I would say is once you notice it, shift to something that will help to bring that hope back. And for me, it was gratitude. That is the very first thing that I would say.
Oh, that's really nice. And acknowledging that, yeah, this is hard,
Absolutely.
but not living there.
Yeah. Oh, and actually, I'm sorry, you did ask for two, and I do have one more. My friend Jamie, I mentioned her in the TED Talk, but she did not know what she was doing. Like, she would just come up and she would just like, again, just be there on the couch with me. We would walk around Target aimlessly. Like, she was just there. And she didn't even know until my TED Talk, when I mentioned her, how important her presence was to me. Because she said she would go home and cry to her husband that she felt like she wasn't doing anything, that she was like, I don't even know if what I'm doing is helpful. But even though we didn't talk about stuff, like, it was very hard for me to put into words because I couldn't even follow the sporadic thoughts that were so toxic. So it was hard for me to then articulate what I was feeling. So even though I didn't have to go through that kind of talk therapy with her, her presence connected me to life, because she was helpful and I had to learn to let people help me. And so I would say, if you also find that you are in a really dark space, in a hard corner, make sure you're surrounding yourself with people who genuinely love you. And the ones who are not bringing about growth or goodness, it's okay to create healthy boundaries there too. But really, like, don't isolate yourself, because I really feel like that was one of the friendships that helped me to stay connected to life and not lose sight of hope.
Yeah, I remember watching you say that, and we had our house burned down, and the day after, that day, somebody, his name is Mike DeCenti. If he ever listens to this, I hope he hears this, because he came and he just sat next to me watching the smolders. He didn't say a word for 3 hours, and that was the perfect thing to do. People think they have to say something. You don't. You just have to be there.
That's right. You don't have to find the perfect thing to say. You just have to be present.
Yeah.
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 So
Wow, you've got
speaking
some
of the
wisdom.
beautiful people in the world, who would you say has influenced you the most in your life?
Influence from a lot of different spaces, but I would say I didn't notice this until I was in the thick of my own grief, and I somehow was able to still put one foot in front of the other. I mean, honestly, people say, I don't know how you did it. And I respond, I don't either. I really don't know. It was just moment by moment. But I think what then I recognized was both of my parents, and I'll start with my mom. My mom has gone through significant things in her life and has always been able to still stand firm in who she is. And so even though we may know some of the hardships that she endured, it's not what she leads with, right? You just kind of learn that it didn't become her identity, but it did make an imprint in her life. And I recognize that about myself. Being a widow doesn't have to be my identity, but it is okay that it made an imprint in my life. And so she kind of showed me how you can carry that. But my father as well, because my dad has a rare neurological disease called PLS. He had first signs of it when he was maybe 38. By the time that I was in 8th grade, he had to medically retire from the Air Force because he was losing mobility, and he was also losing the ability to project his voice. And so as a major in his role, he had to do a lot of speaking, a lot of walking, and that wasn't going to happen anymore. But never once, not once, have I ever heard my father complain.
Wow.
He is quite literally a prisoner in his own body, because you can't hear him speak when we're in large crowds. He cannot walk by himself. He hasn't been to the grocery store in years. And he will never, ever think or say that this cross is too much for him to bear. And so I would say, watching both of them, as you can see, I get emotional about this, because growing up, I didn't have that perspective. It was only when I went through my own stuff that I saw really how strong they are. And so seeing both of them still carrying the weight of the hardships that we all have experienced and not letting that steal their joy, I think that's where I get it from. I know that's where I get it from.
That's beautiful. And in that regard, I think, as our poor listeners have heard about my skin condition so long, but I complained. I whined. If somebody would listen to me, poor Maria too, it's just like, oh my gosh, I'm so itchy. I can't sleep all night. It's just horrible. I look like I'm 100 years old and, now I'm healed. Thank God. But, so how would you advise someone to be both authentic and also not, to stay in the joy? Maybe that's just a DNA thing with your parents, but,
well, what I found though was, that is a great question, because my mom shared later that it's not that he doesn't have those moments, but that's not going to be what you see first from him.
Okay. He doesn't lead with
I remember she told me one time, she's like, yeah, your dad had a hard moment and he just started crying. And he said, God, I'm just tired of this. It's just a lot. Like, he wants to play with his grandkids. He was an active guy his whole life. He was also a speaker and now he can't speak. I mean, come on, right? Like, literally the things he loved most were taken from him. So it's not that he does not feel the weight of that, but again, he doesn't lead with that. That's not, you don't see him and see a bitter man. You don't hear him speak and hear resentment in his voice when he talks about his condition. But I heard this quote in the midst of my grief and I love it. And again, back to the TED Talk. So sorry, guys, you're going to have to go watch the TED Talk.
Yes, they have to.
But in it, this quote really resonated to me. Like, you can feel sad. You can feel angry. You can go to crazy town if you need to.
Right.
But don't build your house there. That's all that is. I mean, I have literally I have moments where I just weep and I feel like those are healing waters when you cry, right? You just got to get some of that stuff. Science actually shows us we're releasing some of the toxic chemicals that our body doesn't need when we cry. So please let yourself cry as often as you need to. It's actually a very healthy practice. So I would say, feel those emotions. And the more that you feel, this is what goes back to 100% human, the more that you feel those emotions, the greater capacity you have to hold space for other people who feel those emotions as well. And when your path crosses theirs, and if they are in that space that feels so familiar to you, why? Because you're human and we all go through this, then you can be that person. You can be that Jamie to them, like my Jamie was to me, and be a source of hope or life, or just hold space for their sadness or their anger. And so this is actually a practice that I teach leaders in the workplace. It is okay for you to feel all that, right? Don't get stuck there, but also, like, how can you move through it in a healthy way? And I call this constructive venting. What you do is you just let it all out. And sometimes, like, it could be in your journal. Other times it could be in therapy. Maybe it's also with a friend. But wherever you are or whoever you're interacting with, set the stage before you do this. You have to let them know what you want from this exchange, or you have to set your mind right before you go into it on your journal. This is going to be a constructive venting session. The difference, a venting session, you go off and you leave angry. You leave the same way that you came in. All you did was have, diarrhea of the mouth, basically. Excuse me if that's too vulgar, but you basically are just unloading all of this and you do nothing with it. On the other side, the healthy approach is to say, I'm going to get all of this out and it's going to be super messy. And I may not like myself for saying some of these things, but I know I have to get it out because that's the healthy thing. At the end of this, now, what is one productive step forward?
Kelly, you've done that. I want to just say that what you described, Kelly did. She uses her skin condition to help others and, hold space for others. And you did vent with me, Kelly, but you at the end of every conversation, you would have a plan, you would be, so we were close so you could vent, but you're right. I've never heard somebody articulate it that beautifully. That was exactly beautiful. Right.
Yeah. And I didn't live there. I still went out and did a lot of other things. So I think that's a great answer for people that are suffering to hear,
right.
That you should not suffer in silence. And you should vent and get that, this horrible thing that's happened to me. I lost my mom. I got diagnosed with cancer. Whatever it is that you need that therapy. I love, setting a groundwork and then don't live there. It's great.
And yeah, because the thing, but usually we don't want to go there because we think if we do go there to that dark space, that we won't come back, that we're going to lose ourselves. It's going to take over. But what I have found is when you go there, that's when you regain your power, because you find out that you can go there and come back, that you're not going to die if you tell somebody how angry you are, that you're not going to lose control, right? It actually helps to move it through you instead of being stuff. Like, we have to flow, right? We need to allow things to flow through us. And we are beautifully complex humans, and we can feel all sorts of emotions in a millisecond. I remember one counselor said, "Hey, these are the stages of grief." And I was like, well, I must be crazy because I feel all of those in 1 hour. Like, right? And so it's like, we have to allow ourselves to flow through that. And you can think of it this way. If you have a washcloth and you fill it up with water, it feels really, really, really heavy. But then when you wring it out, doesn't it feel much lighter? So imagine, like, that's the process of like going through those emotions. Maybe you're talking it out. Maybe you're crying it out. Maybe you're running it out. Like, whatever it looks like, you have to just face them. And I promise you, you will regain your power.
That is
Wow,
so
what a great place to add. Maria, you want to ask the last question?
Yeah,
So that
yeah. I just want to just pause right there though, because that is so true. There's nothing you can't say. There's nothing you can't feel and live and move beyond it. And, I think you're right. People are afraid of anger. They're afraid of grief. They're afraid to go there. They're afraid to articulate it. And that's the authenticity piece that you're so, anyway, that's great. I'm very moved. That's great, because you've articulated some stuff that I've known, but never so beautifully and clearly spoken. So the last question is there anything else that you'd like to say that we haven't covered?
Yeah. Well, when I talk about authenticity, I certainly talk about the human experience and kind of just allowing ourselves to accept that life is messy, right? And just the question then is, how do we make life beautiful in the mess? So yeah, like that is part of being authentic. But the other part of authenticity for me in my journey has been the work that I'm doing. And not just finding a job, because I used to be in HR, I used to be in recruiting, and I felt it then. Like what I feel very passionate about now with this, authentic vocation. I don't know. I have to come up with a word for it now, but I knew it then because I would never place somebody based on a title. I always wanted them to articulate what they really wanted from a job. And even if the job I was recruiting for wasn't for them, I would tell them. Sorry to all the hiring managers, but I would tell them, because what I've recognized is that, and speaking of hearing somebody else say it and it crystallizes it for you, I read this phenomenal book called The Great Work of Your Soul, The Great Work of Your Life, by Stephen Cope. And in it, he talks about, the word for it was Dharma, but this is like purpose or your calling, your vocation. And this is what crystallized for me. We all have gifts and talents that are naturally wired in us. Songwriters, firefighters, mechanics, whatever it is. And the way that you can tap into that is just by noticing what makes you happy, what lights you up. Because if you follow that, what you find is not only freedom in your own soul's work, but whatever you recognize is like your gift to the world. That is how you save the world around you, how you serve the world around you. And so when I talk about authenticity, I'm very much speaking about how can you have an extraordinary life by living out the work that feels authentic to you, and not because of a paycheck or a title or what your parents said you should do or what your degree says from years ago. But truly following that, because I can imagine this world where people actually do the thing that they love to do, and think about how much better we all would be in serving each other from that space, from that authentic space. So I think that's the last thing I would like to leave with your listeners.
Awesome. And we'll put where people can find you in the show notes.
Sounds
So you're
great.
doing coaching as well. People can go to you.
Yes,
for,
I do some executive coaching,
Okay.
but lots of speaking, and I have a program coming out next year, Mindful Living.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. This has been awesome,
It has.
Karen. Thank you. And we're going to do our takeaways in a minute.
All right. Thank you, ladies.
It's now time for the takeaways. Maria, you and I have heard the takeaways are the best part of the show.
That's right, Kelly, because the takeaways are curated information, which is what we give to our clients when we coach them.
If you would like to take your performance to the next level in health, life, or leadership, go to our website and schedule your free 30-minute consultation.
Yes, just click on our coaching page and book there. We're looking forward to bringing out the champion in you.
And now, the takeaways.
So Oh, Maria, Karen Allen, keynote speaker, founder of 100% Human, and survivor of just an incredible violent family tragedy with almost a mystery. You've got, if you're just doing the takeaways, you really need to listen to this entire show and her TED Talk.
Yeah.
So, what wisdom, in helping us through really hard things. And we all have them, no
Right.
matter what. I mean, we may not have it to the scale of what she went through, but just small things that just really trip us up and put us into a traumatic hole in our lives. And so let's each grab two things that will help us get through something really hard. Maria, you want to start with your first one?
Sure. I totally loved her verbiage around mental wellness. And she's absolutely right. We talk about mental illness or mental health, and those words have gotten to be sort of negative connotations, and we all have to be mentally well. And I particularly love the practical tips she had around how to measure your mental wellness. The two things that she mentioned were, looking back and seeing how long it's been between whatever angry episodes, or how long you stayed in the dark place, or, kind of measuring time to look for progress. And the other one was to compare, instead of comparing your behavior now to what you wish you were or what you hoped you would, but comparing it to how you were before. I think those are really practical tips for those of us who are trying to, which of course we are, trying to grow and be fit mentally and emotionally, our best selves.
Yes. I thought that was a very unique perspective.
Yeah.
And just little tips and tricks. You and I love to talk about mindset and having a strong mind and how that helps us in all walks of life. And I love the little analogy that she gave about doing just one push-up a day.
Yeah.
If we did 365 push-ups a year, just one a day, we would get stronger. So finding that one little tool that can, whether it's just giving gratitude or checking, like I love the, everybody knows I love the thought diary app. I'm having an unhelpful thought. I'm having a distorted thought, and just something every day to bring about this mental wellness. I loved that one. What was your second one?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Kelly. That's another really practical thing. Here's a way to measure, if I'm using this app and examining my thoughts. This is cognitive behavioral therapy. She has different words for it. That's great, Kelly. My second one was, I just love this because I think we can be so afraid of despair or anger or whatever that we don't want to go there. And so her, and we don't want to become the kind of person like, you mentioned, like, I complain all the time, but you didn't. You complained to select people. And then at the end of every conversation, Kelly, that I've had with you throughout our friendship, you've said, I'm going forward. I'm better. I'm going to have this new plan or whatever. So I love the productive venting, not just like, but the way, sometimes we just have to go there and be authentic about what we're really thinking and experiencing, but we need to do it in a safe place with somebody who's going to maybe be a good listener and help us. And then we need to say, okay, I've expressed that this really makes me sad or mad, and she made the good point. Like, people sometimes get hung up in grief because they're afraid to grieve. They think they're going to drown in it, and they think they'll never come up, but that doesn't happen. The floor is always there. You just gotta do it.
Yeah. And you always come up. It's required. In fact, it's the only way to come up.
Right. Exactly. That's right.
The only way out is through.
Right. And the only way through is just getting in there and being there. That's absolutely right.
Yeah. When you're going through hell, keep going. Winston Churchill. Right.
Exactly.
Isn't that his quote? Which, my second one ties in exactly with that, which is, don't isolate yourself, because, if you're venting to someone, whether it's a therapist or someone else, you are talking with someone. But I loved both your story and her story of, in this tragic time when your house burned to the ground and you guys were homeless at that point, your neighbor Mike sat with you for 3 hours, didn't say a word, but
Didn't
just
say a
was
word.
with you.
Right.
And her friend Jamie, same thing.
Yeah,
She said
yeah.
Jamie was just there. And so connect with someone else. I just think when you are in a trauma, isolating yourself is the worst thing to do. Even if it's just, you don't have to get to that venting stage yet.
Right. That's right.
But you could start by just having someone be there and then work into the venting stage. But it's kind of like,
that's so good. Yeah.
we're humans and we're all connected. Every single one of us suffers from something. And that's a commonality that we share. And just knowing that someone is going to be there to double your joys and have your sorrows, I think is
And
huge.
reciprocally be that person. You
Yeah,
don't have
and
to know what to
reciprocally be that
say. You
person.
can't, in
Yeah.
fact, you cannot fix it. I
Right.
promise you, there's nothing you could say that can fix grief or sorrow or anything, but you can be the person who just sits there and says,
Yeah.
yeah, I get it. Yeah. Or just quiet.
Well, Maria, I hope
Great
that
show.
I hope our listeners get as much out of our guests as we do, because this is why we do it. It's just,
It's not
it
perfect.
really is. It
Yeah.
is. Even
learned
you
so much.
who came home on a red eye, got no sleep, and here you are this afternoon doing a podcast. And so I
Yeah.
really appreciate it. And I love you so much, Maya.
I
Thank
love you
for,
too.
for being that person sitting next to me.
I love
And
you. Well,
I want to be there sitting next
yeah,
to
and
you.
you have. I love you so much.
Love
I'll
you
talk
too.
to you soon. All right.
Alrighty.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Champions Mojo podcast with host Kelly Palace and Maria Parker. Champions Mojo is produced by Cabra Media, and a new episode debuts every Tuesday. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. Follow Champions Mojo on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook @Champions Mojo.